Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis. Dune. I'm Callan, this is Matt,
Hey guys, welcome.
and this is Evan,
Hello, everyone.
talking about Dune Part 2 specifically today, because we missed the first one, and we'll just kind of cover it lightly here, I suppose. Evan, if you'd like to summarize for anyone who somehow is living under a rock and doesn't know what this is.
Yeah, so today we will review Dune Part 2, the second installment of the rebooted series of films based off the acclaimed science fiction book series by Frank Herbert. This film is once again directed by Denis Villeneuve, whose other sci fi credits, interestingly enough, I learned yesterday, include Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, both of which can also trace their roots to literature, interestingly enough. So, coincidence? Who knows? As with the previous film, the one that came out in 2021, like Callan mentioned, this is a adaptation of the first book in the Dune series, also called Dune. Um, plot-wise, this film essentially revolves around the adventures of Paul Atreides as he basically, traverses through the plains of the planet Arrakis and gets involved in a prophecy that can shake the foundations of the entire galaxy. Also, worms. Big worms.
Muad'Dib! Muad'Dib! That's basically all I remember from the first two-thirds of this film.
Indeed, indeed. So, I mean, it really does go without saying that this is like, I mean, how do we even start like the history of Dune? I
I
mean,
mean,
this
I
is
guess introduction
by
to it
far
to it
one of the
personally,
most,
because everyone has
yeah,
their own story for how they got into this franchise or didn't, as it may be.
right.
Do you want to start
This is
us with that,
science
Matt?
fiction 101.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm probably the wrong person to kick us off, but I will. I,
That's another
I,
T-shirt for you.
yeah, there we are. I have attempted to read the book a couple of times, and I haven't quite made it through. And I don't think that my opinion will in any way damage the reputation or harm the sales. It's kind of a literature classic, I don't think that I don't have anything
Absolutely, yeah.
especially negative to say either. But for me, I think it's just not quite my cup of tea. Some of that is a lot of it is to do with like the use of like invented or just idiosyncratic language like for the setting. I mean, you open that book and it just hits you with Gom Jabbar and like Paul Atreides has like three different names. He's Muad'Dib, he's Paul Atreides, he's Kwisatz Haderach, he's the heir of Caledon or and we're on our way from leaving that planet to another planet, and that was like I didn't really understand what we were talking about until I saw part one of this reboot series, and also years ago when I was a kid, I saw the the movie from the 80s, directed by
David Lynch.
David Lynch, and who is a amazing filmmaker who's made some films I really do love, like Blue Velvet, for example. That movie though is its own like wonderful, like unique experience, and having seen that does not help in any way, shape, or form understand
It's a
the
very
setting.
different
It's of its
experience from
era.
it.
It's of its time.
Yeah,
It's also of its director, who's just, I'm
Yes.
not
Yeah.
convinced has ever read the book or any books or cares anything at all about the book, or like he was just doing what he was doing. And he had a painful experience making the movie. Very interesting movie. But having seen that doesn't prepare me for, really what is the story here? That only helped a little bit. It was kind of interesting just to be in a world where the same role has been played by Patrick Stewart and Josh Brolin. That's a little funny to me. Like that's
Mm,
just I don't think of those two people as being
compatible. Yeah.
at all serving the same needs on any film. But
different,
Gurney Halleck,
different
yeah,
in terms
yeah.
of casting. Yeah,
But yeah, that was, I don't really, I've flirted with the series, like trying to read it properly, and just the language is a little too impenetrable for me. I can talk about it a bit, but only a bit. These movies, I saw the first one not in the theater, but it made me really want to see the second one in the theater, so I made sure I
Mm,
did that. I saw this like the day after opening day, and there was quite a lot of people there. It was a fun theater going experience. It's a real spectacle. I'm glad I did see it in the theater. And in terms of the presentation, you mentioned the director. He's wonderful in terms of like the atmosphere, the scale, the
absolutely.
the actual cinematic qualities are wonderful, and those things I really appreciate. So I think if I have any attractions. They're more to do with just there comes a point where I stopped understanding or relating to what was going on, you know. But I'm not sure if that's a problem of the film or the source material or some combination, or you know, it's really just my opinion. But
Yeah.
that's me, you know. Who'd like to go next?
For me, I had even less to go on when it came in because aside from the obvious aspects of pop culture that everyone knows about this because it is just that big, to me, it was always something that was just on the back burner. Like I need to read that. It's a classic. Everyone needs to read it. You know, at some point at least try to. You know, I'll get around to it. And never did until the first film came out, and that was kind of the first proper. Oh, so this is what everyone's been talking about. That being said, I do owe a lot to Dune because some of my favorite things in the sci-fi and sci-fantasy space of fiction are 100% dependent on this franchise's creation. I mean, it's the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi, really, in terms of
Mhm.
scale of influence for the number of people who have gone on to create things post this era. For me, it was Warhammer 40,000 and Twilight Imperium and other adjacent things where you can just see the influences just there for all to to look at. They're not hiding the fact that they're calling on this classic for its material and homaging it at the very least. But that was kind of my entry point. That was okay. I know of this. I know the highlights that everyone tends to, and now this film is coming out. And funnily enough, when I watched the first one, I didn't actually know because again, I don't tend to look at too much information going into a film to avoid spoilers. I didn't actually know it was even a two-parter. So when it ended at the very end of the first one, I was like, oh, okay, that was abrupt. But I was excited for the second one. I did enjoy the first, and I enjoyed the second. For me, it was, like you said, mostly down to the cinematic brilliance. I mean, this film, in terms of how it's shot and edited, and the music and the every aspect of the thematic kind of interplay between both of them, really, is just fantastic. I love every aspect of that. It's got to the point where it was reaching iconic levels at certain stages, and that's not to be disregarded or overplayed. It's really, really a triumph of filmmaking. For me, we'll get into it a bit later after the initial impressions, but for me, where it falls flat are a little bit on the story and character side. But again, like you say, how much of that is to do with the original material, the screenplay, how it's adapted from that, I don't know. We'll discuss it. But yeah, that's
Mhm.
me going into this basically. What about you, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I follow very much the same boat that you guys did. I've read, sections from the book series, though never, completed it because, it's not, it's a very well written book, but it's not one of those things that you could just kind of pick up and read casually.
It is
It is
dense.
quite dense with the language and, just the general structure. I had seen the David Lynch film prior to this as well. I'd also read bits and pieces of the comic book, to which I believe there are like two or three different adaptations, but don't quote me on that directly. I think Dark Horse did one, but again, not entirely sure off the top of my head. Having seen the first of this rebooted series in theaters, I was very much into it, and I was very much looking forward to this one. Again, very much from the same boat that you guys are coming from. I thought the film as a spectacle was absolutely amazing. I do honestly have to say I enjoyed it more than the first film, which I did enjoy the first film quite a bit, but this one definitely, at least for me, in terms of just structure and even pacing, which is actually ironic because the time difference is not really that severe between the two films, but this one I actually felt like went at a much more, I guess you could say, palatable pace. Whereas with the other one, there were kind of ebbs that were kind of lost me a bit. But in terms of my also personal criticisms, like you said, Callan, like my hangups mainly just revolve around just the general characterization, as well as the shifting from perspectives can sometimes be a bit jarring, and just the general story. The presentation is absolutely spectacular, and again, there were a lot of moments in the theater, which, by the way, like we keep saying, like this is a theater experience. This is a theater
Oh yeah,
experience movie. Like if
absolutely.
you get
If
the
you have
chance
any
to,
chance to watch
if
it
you
in
have any,
theater.
yeah, like if you get a chance to see this, like it's definitely one of those films that's made for the big screen. And there were a lot of moments just with like just the music and the atmosphere where I felt like a kid again. It's in the sense of just soaking in that really hardcore sci-fi. But for that same reason, I can also understand how it might not always appeal to everybody because it does take a lot of elements from the origins of that genre, which some people might not initially be able to get into from the get-go, kind of like the book itself, ironically. So overall, I did very much enjoy it, though again, hang-ups with story, though presentation absolutely spectacular, and would still definitely recommend, not just if you're a Dune fan, but even if you have a passive interest in sci-fi, kind of like what Callan said. So much of this story inspired so many of the things that we enjoy today, and as that in and of itself, it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, can't ever sell that for me. It just has touched so much of everything that's
Yeah.
come since. It is like I say, it's the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi. But yeah, unfortunately, aside from everything we say about the cinematic brilliance, the way they've tied into music to the visuals and the specific scene
Hans Zimmer did
pacing.
the music for this again, by
Yeah,
the way.
Hans Zimmer
Mm.
doing fantastic job with this as always. Aside from that, most of what I have to say about it is kind of a lukewarm to criticism level of things. So does anyone else want to raise up something they really liked about this? Because again, there's lots of good stuff, but it's kind of you'd
Yeah.
expect that to be good next to the brilliance of everything cinematically speaking. So everything
I
else to
will
me
say,
comes out
yeah.
as like a eh.
Well, kind of like what I said before, I do appreciate that even though the film's just as long, if not maybe even a little bit longer than part one, I just felt like the general presentation made the story flow at a much more consistent pace for me personally. Even though there's a lot of cross-cutting between various characters, I felt that unlike with part one, they gave each set of characters, because it's essentially like pockets of different characters in different places. But I felt that one of the major improvements from the first film was that they gave each pocket their own space to breathe. So that way, whenever you did cut back and forth, it didn't feel quite as jarring, like you were like left off at something. It almost felt like going from different episodes of a TV series one to the other. It's like, okay, now we're following, Atreides. Oh, now we're following, the Emperor. Now we're following the families. But again, it didn't come off like it wasn't like a whiplash sort of thing, at least to me. Like I felt like the transitions were much more succinct than they were previously, which made the flow of the story come off for me a lot more digestible.
I think maybe I have like a slightly different take on it from what Evan just said, but I don't want it to come across as disagreement. It's more like
That's cool, man.
I think it's more like 'cause I think I enjoyed this movie more for sure than the first one, but I also think I was more disappointed by it by the end. Like it's a weird thing because I enjoyed a lot of the build up in the first one, and I was enjoying that continuing throughout like the first solid 2/3 of this movie, where I felt like okay, we're building towards like something substantial here, and it felt like more of the same great build up for me. And then by the end of it I came across away feeling just like I don't really know what that was about actually, but I was convinced that I was getting delivered something very promising all throughout up until like the kind of 11th hour there. So it was weird. I didn't have any problem following like the different groups of characters throughout the first one and in the first like half of this one at all. I really enjoyed. It's funny because I'm as Callan has mentioned a few times in this discussion, characters and story or like sort of the areas where he sees pitfalls, and I do agree. For me, I'm usually like I could take or leave a setting as long as you give me a strong character. I
Mm.
don't really
Mhm.
care too much. That was my big thing about like Arcane, for example. I don't know anything about that setting, and I don't care. The strength of character and the writing was awesome. It was wonderful, and I was able to. I have no interest of learning more about the setting. No offense to the setting, it's just not my thing. I mean, I don't play the games, and I'm not going to. But they gave me what I needed to know, and the strength of character was phenomenal. This I felt like the main character, got stronger for me throughout the second entry. I was really more with Paul and like his kind of circle of characters around him than I ever was at any point in the first movie. However, the strength of all this really for me is kind of the world. Like I think I fell in love with the presentation of the setting, the scale of everything, the kind of technology and the unique way that they have to survive and why they do the things they do and why people believe what they believe and when are beliefs dangerous and when are they manipulative
Mm.
and they get into the ethics of those sorts of questions and the political nature of it and they ask all those questions. I don't think you get the strongest payoff in the world for the story, but I was really immersed in the setting. which is a
And that is
totally,
what,
bass
for
backwards
most people's
experience for me.
experiences,
You know what I mean?
is that Dune's
Yeah,
strength. It's playing into that.
yeah,
The problem is, in a book, you can spend more time on those background flashes, and the framing and set dressing to all of this stuff. But in the film,
yeah,
all of the most interesting things to me, like the politics of the families, the flashes of the Bene
yeah,
Gesserit, Bene Gesserit, and their influences, etc. All of that you get for about 2 minutes a piece each scene, and
right.
then you cut back to the desert. And for me, that was where all the most interesting stuff was happening. Was all of that politicking, and it, given how much time we spend in the desert, both at the end of the first film, or even the second half of the first film, and then the first 2/3 of this one, I felt like more time could have been spent elsewhere without suffering too much. Not that I'd advocate for any of it being cut down to just a montage, but in terms of plot progression, you could have made the entire desert experience a montage and accomplished the same story result. You wouldn't have it. You'd lose the richness and the depth and all of the fun of it in the film. I'm not saying we should do that, but you could definitely have shaved off a good third of what they did show, and compressed the rest in terms of scene pacing, etc., to allow it to happen, and then you'd have more time to spend on all the background stuff that ultimately it's really important because it sets up the framing for what happens at the very end and the story to come in the future with the next with the follow up and the sequel. But it does basically does only enough to establish those. It doesn't let you sit in the scenes. It doesn't let you properly enjoy the characters that are setting up those moments. It's just a case of, hey, remember this is happening and it's going to be important later. And then for me at least, when we actually got to that later, to the finale, given the amount of build-up you mentioned there, Matt, the amount of build-up that was coming from both films, I felt a bit cheated at the end with how
Oh
swiftly it
yeah, for
resolved and
sure.
how much it
Yeah.
didn't sit in any of the drama of the family connections of the politics. If anything, it was just a case of, like the first film, unfortunately, cool fight, end. It and again, maybe
See,
that's part of that is
I
the fact
got
they're framing the book. But to me, I would have adapted this differently if the book plays out shot for shot like this. I think that there was a lot more they could have done with the time they had.
I
Personally.
got
I think
less.
I,
I got less of it. I got less and less out of it the deeper into the movie it was getting,
Mm,
because
Mhm.
it kept, like, to me it seemed to be asking interesting questions along the way, and then like not really like answering any of them, or really even playing with them after they were asked. I it to me, for example, like, I really loved Baron Harkonnen, like
yeah.
in the first one. I thought he was a wonderful, like, cool, like, villain, just this ominous presence, and wonderfully played by Stellan Skarsgård, and just so creepy and
And he
weird.
just
And he's like
spends the whole time in the
morbidly
tub in this
obese,
one.
but he floats around, and like, and the sound design is awesome through in
Mm.
these movies.
yeah.
The sound design is its own star, but like his apparatus, like his spinal
It's got
thing,
that Vader
that,
effect, is how I describe it to a friend.
yeah,
That kind of that presence, the ambiance, the visuals, the
yeah.
sound effect,
You
everything about
you
what
feel the
the
weight
framing
with
of the
each.
character is
I thought
fantastic.
Yeah.
I thought he was wonderful in the first movie, and in this movie, I felt like he may as well not have been there. Like in the
Mm.
end, like I didn't quite
Including his demise,
really,
which was
I
supposed to have some thematic
yeah,
and
I
emotional
felt
oomph, and it was like, okay, I need to take care of this thread before we move on, and then walk up the stairs.
I
I
had no
felt the exact
idea.
same way about Dave Bautista's character.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
His
yeah.
son, like
Oh yeah,
he was
time for
built
my
up to
big
be.
He
matchup, and he's gone.
What was that?
he was
I get the
actually,
point. Like I get the idea that he's supposed to be like more pathetic than he tries to pretend to be, but it's like you come up with that line of like you have to give a character a little bit more agency than this
Bear in
because
mind, he
they literally
succeeds literally never. Outside of the ambush
yeah
at the start,
yeah.
where everything's carried for him by his forces
he
and his
runs
the politics
he
framing of the
runs
ambush,
from
etc.,
home
he accomplishes nothing in both films, basically.
Yeah.
after yeah it's just and they literally bring in his own brother to replace him who just does everything he did but better and it's like
Yeah,
okay then what's like I get that they're trying to sell the dynamic but at the same
That
time you need to at least believe from the get-go and I guess this could also be a partial fault with the first film but at least the first film had him doing a little bit more in terms of
so
agency this
Dave
one doesn't give him anything and it's very disappointing.
Dave Bautista's character's name is
Beast
Robin,
Rab
or
Beast Rabbit.
Robin. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he, I want to say he's a like a, you get his perspective in the book. Like in the early book that I tried to read, I want to say that like the early introduction of like the Harkonnen side is like from his perspective. And I don't know how much of the the story skews this way. I would say when I was trying to read it, I had a very different view of Rabin. I think he was supposed to look a bit more like Timothy Chalamet's character, like Paul. Like I think he was supposed to be sort of younger and sort of like inexperienced and sort of slight looking, because the Harkonnen, Baron Harkonnen, I want to say he's like heavily implied to be like a malicious homosexual kind of stereotype kind of villain. I think it's one of the areas in which people kind of say the book hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
I can't speak to personal experience about whether or not it's a nefarious thing from the author, or whether it's just, if people are like overly sensitive about it, I won't render a judgment on that because I don't have an opinion on it myself. I'm sure there's a discussion to be had either way. But the character, I want to say that the Baron character makes like a lot of weird comments about like Paul and possibly also maybe his nephews. Or like has like some kind of predatory relationship on the both of them. I'm not sure. But whatever they did with the way that they realized the Rabin character, to me it actually got actively annoying because the scenes were repetitive. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Where to the point where it made the threat of the Baron less credible because he kept saying, "If you fail again, I'm going to kill you," and
Yeah.
then they never actually did that. And he kept
Yeah,
failing, and it was like, okay, but
they bring
you mentioned
Stilgar
Vader.
in and they
You
try and
mentioned
yeah.
Vader, like Vader actually chokes people. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so it's like when they
Exactly.
fail, that's it. So it got, and then all of it was building towards a point where, at some point, when Christopher Walken gets involved, which I really don't understand,
Everything
when
about
the
him.
Talk
Emperor,
about a cameo I was not expecting. I'm
But
like,
yeah,
just the
what,
character though,
what's
like
what,
not everything we learn about
what,
them is not followed through in the film. It's oh, you love
yeah,
this is your son, but then express no regret, no remorse, no anything at all. Okay, fine, whatever.
when when
Love
when
him
the
like a
when
son.
the emperor when the emperor's on his way to Arrakis, Baron Harkonnen instructs like word to be sent to like the other noble families or whatever, and I'm like, okay, so is he gonna like mount a kind of like civil war kind of thing, or
mhm.
and then he just kind of bows and gets yelled at and he dies. But he's kind of like smacked around by like the emperor's blades, right? Like before that even happens, I didn't get what was happening. Like when he was like crawling up like the steps
It's
to
like,
the
I'll at
throne
least
or
sit on the
whatever.
throne for a brief moment.
Yeah,
I
it
will
was meant to
fulfill
be
my live
symbolic
stream. Was
of
I
his
kind of
like
guess.
what
I
yeah,
felt this was where I felt
symbolism.
like from that moment on I really didn't understand why anybody was doing anything, and
Watching
I
the
felt like
entirety of
it.
that finale, I felt like we were missing the book. Like the book had all
Yeah,
of this stuff that was going on in people's heads and backgrounds. I don't know. Like maybe it is that simple book. I highly
Mhm.
doubt it, given how critically acclaimed it is. But to me, it felt like this was a failure in adaptation. And to get
Right.
across as a
Well,
completely oblivious, viewer, I wasn't
right.
understanding the framing outside of the loose hand wave of okay, yeah, this is kind of happening. I mean, the fact that all of the families are off screen, just up above in orbit,
the
Well,
also in
it's
the
threatening
funny
but
you
not
mentioned that
appearing.
because yeah, it's funny you mentioned that though, Callan, because there are a few scenes where the dialogue between characters is very limited and there are like these like pauses, and it almost made me think like if this was probably in the book you could hear dialogue going on in people's heads,
Yeah,
but it's a movie.
exactly. Yeah, and you've got
So
more time to sit in those scenes, and even though nothing's physically happening, they're ruminating, they're plotting, they're scheming,
mhm,
all of that stuff, and that's great for books. But when it comes to the medium of film, you have to adapt that and find another
yeah
way, an alternate way to present it, so that
right,
the
it's
viewer can
funny.
experience it and understand, and digest.
right.
And they
Because
sorry, Karen.
it's really fun. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I
Yeah,
kept
no, it's all
thinking
right.
it was
It's
it's the
lagging.
delay. I
Mm.
apologize for that. I kept having the impression up until the failure to execute with the Baron. I had the impression that this was a massive improvement on the book, because in the book I wasn't impressed with him at all. He's pretty one note scheming villain, like as you were just saying there. Like every one of his scenes is, ah, yes, and then we'll do this, and then we'll move these pieces, and then yes, and then this game of power will net us this, and blah. And it's not badly done, but it's certainly you've seen it 1,000 times, especially in the time since that book was published. But there's all these. There's like a company, I can't remember the name of it, but there's like some kind of like conglomerate that he's concerned with gaining control of or something, and all that stuff seems to have nothing to do with
Navigators
what we
Guild, is it?
saw
Sorry,
here.
can't recall.
No, it's got a name. It's got like a proper name. Like the Chom Chon Company or something. I forget.
Yeah.
It reminds me of I don't know. It's some kind of name. But the point is, like, he's doing a lot of, you know, background takeover stuff in the early book. And by the time that we get to that reveal of just everything that was happening in the climax, including the fact that he's Jessica's father, um, I don't like none of it felt as important as I think the movie wants you to think it is.
Yeah,
You know, like
that
and
was that was true of
it doesn't hit as
large
hard because
swaths
they
of the
don't.
plot, not just like his character as
yeah,
well for me.
Yeah, it doesn't
yeah.
hit as hard because they either don't, give it enough time to breathe, or they don't mention it at all. Because literally, like the sequence when like you brought up Jessica, um, Paul, learning that, that Jessica was, his daughter. I mean, we get like one flashback that's like one scene and that's it.
Mm.
And then, when it does come time for the climax, he's like, he literally calls him grandfather as he's about to kill him, and they build it up like he's like coming to this realization. But we've had so little time that,
And
I mean,
ultimately, it
it
doesn't
doesn't hit.
matter because there's no
It doesn't
personal
hit like
connection
it
between
should.
these
Is
two.
basically what
You
I'm
know,
getting at.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's just kind of there as a detail. And I hope it's more significant in the books because in the film it certainly doesn't get across. Sticking with the Harkonnens, the brother as well, the second guy comes in. To me,
I think
he
he was a
was
cousin, just for
cousin.
the just so we
Sorry,
don't get corrected on that.
get in the
the guy's
comments.
cousin.
No,
Yeah.
he
He
was
was awesome.
basically skill and he respects a good fight. That was literally the character. You know, there was nothing else to him besides that. And obviously his
Well, it
sadistic
was
nature.
funny because
But that's all
they
Harkonnens.
did give him like some weird like sexual, you know, like
Yeah,
repressed kind of like backstory,
Yeah,
and we saw things from like his perspective for a scene or two, and I thought, well, okay,
and it just
I'm
didn't go
interested,
anywhere.
but it didn't go anywhere. Yeah, like I mean, I was interested in every character at the start. You know, it was just at some point there was always like a thread where I seemed to have lost interest, or I felt like there wasn't quite the payoff, you know, that was necessary for all the buildup.
right.
I love the again just the presentation of everything. I love the decision to choose to display their planet the way that they did when they introduced his character, like
Mm.
this sort of like this like black and white muted color, like kind of uh uh, gladiatorial kind of arena. You know, I didn't really. I felt like the details that I didn't get. I felt like some of it. I felt like they were coming. You know what I mean? I was convinced that they were coming. Like all throughout. I
Mm.
don't want to give the impression that it was a negative slog because throughout the entire like 80% of the movie, I feel like, yeah, cool,
It's
great, this is
building up quite
awesome.
nicely. Yeah, we've got another
Yeah,
Right.
third of the film to come, and then it's actually a tenth, and it's gone. You know,
yeah.
it felt very
Mhm.
it wasn't top heavy in a way it should have been for me to have enough payoff to
Right.
build to for this build up because we spend so much
And
time in the desert. You know, just
his character as well. Like the I think he was called Fade. I think that was his name. But he was that it. But I didn't understand why he fights Paul at the end on behalf of the Emperor. Was that just an excuse to try to kill Paul?
pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
And
The
even
fact that it isn't
then,
clear is a problem.
Yeah.
he-
Can I just say though one thing, like from a choreography standpoint, I thought that knife fight was very well done. I also
Yes.
it was
from a
awesome.
story,
But
also another thing too, I love the fact that there's no music during any of
mhm,
it. It
Mm.
adds this sense of like just rawness and realism to it
for
that
sure.
actually ironically reminded me a little bit of John Wick of all things.
Mm.
Mm.
And I thought the choreography in that scene was absolutely fantastic. So
Yeah, please don't
I
take
think
us as
yeah,
selling the
like
film short on those kind of levels. It's a
yeah,
shame because we don't spend much time on those things. It's hard to have a verbal discussion about them without going into the nitty gritty of
right,
techniques
I think it's because
and
every
choreography designing and all that stuff.
right.
But it's
pretty
all of choreography,
like
design,
every scene
aesthetic,
is
music,
awesome.
everything is
Like
fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
exactly.
the presentation
And
of
like
every scene is awesome. That's
Yeah,
why it's
exactly.
because you could just talk about every scene. Like I mean, riding the worm, like that was
Yep.
amazing. Like
The gunfight with the
the way
transporter and everything. Everything was fantastic.
the
this
way
film
it
would
opened.
probably be interesting in 3D now that I think about it.
Mm.
Oh no.
No? Oh,
Nothing's good in 3D. That's
what?
it's nothing
Nothing.
against the nothing. Like literally nothing.
I don't know about
But nothing. people. Like it's good in 3D. Okay. But anyway, the way it opened, like like the gunfight, where like the sort of levitating, troops in the beginning.
Yeah,
I
that was
mean,
the
the
first
presentation of
striking
every
imagery for
scene.
me. Yeah,
Yeah, like I mean, it was awesome, and I felt like the entire theater was like absorbed in the experience. Like, it's amazing filmmaking.
yeah.
It's just I didn't understand
That's
what
a
you were
good.
being.
That's a good
I didn't
actual
understand the.
microcosm of an example, actually, because it's too reductive to say this is style over substance. It's not just that. It's just because there is so much style, it really needs to hold up and meet and match at least halfway with the substance. And to me, it just doesn't. But that scene, as an
I
example, was beautifully
It,
executed, visual,
right.
amazing. But think about how much time it took to establish that basically a dropship of soldiers was defeated. That was basically it. It ends with the whole "How many times have I told you not to turn your back?" Never comes again. It's just that a lot of time is spent in scenes like that, protracted throughout the entirety of the second half of the first film, and then the first 2/3 of this one. Essentially, just training in the desert and familiarization with the
Well, I
culture,
think that's
which
what the
would be
book is.
fantastic.
right.
But
I think that is what the book is,
yeah, that's
though.
what I mentioned earlier. Like the adaptation needed to take more liberties, I think, to make that work. Given the fact they've made this into 2 films, because for me, again, not advocating this because the style and the quality and the things they could have done with 2 films is absolutely warranted, splitting it into 2. But this, based on what it actually delivers, could have been 1 film for me. Just a long 1 film. You could have truncated it down. The reason you wouldn't want to do that is you want to take time to breathe and live in the world and this
Well,
rich setting and explore these
there's
cool
also
ideas and concepts and everything like that. But they don't do that enough to justify the length for me, because I think
there's
of
also
one
the fact
scene for the
that
desert sequences, which is them choosing his name. That was the only time I thought, okay, this is not just a plot relevant bit. This is actually just the people being people. Everything else
Right.
was, let me
but
explain my culture. Let
it-
me talk to you about the plot. Let me set up the future juice. It was all that stuff.
it's funny because the original movie was 1 movie and it was horrendous, and
Yes, yeah.
they did squish everything into like the very end. I
And this
completely
shouldn't have been made
understand their
1.
choice
I'm
not
just
to
saying,
do
based
that.
on what they
But
did with the 2,
yeah,
it could have been, and that's not what you want for this kind of film and this length of story. So
I
that's
didn't
just
want
very odd
less
for
of
me.
any of that. I wanted
Mhm.
more of the other stuff. Like
Hmm.
I don't want less desert. I loved all the stuff in the desert. It is about the Furman culture. It's about that is what it's about. It's
Hmm.
about his position in that culture. I don't think that they should have cut any of that. Like really, like I thought that that was really strong stuff. I just think if anything, they could have expanded the story out to maybe like a trilogy for me, like in terms of
Or
as long as you're
just
going to
just
give
put
me
more in the
more.
other scenes, and made those
That's
scenes with
exactly
the
what I'm
film
about to
and
say.
yeah,
The stuff
Mhm.
extra planetary. Wait, maybe I'm not saying the same thing. But more in what scenes?
just more in the
What were
scenes that
you
they
gonna?
do use. Like the stuff,
Right.
there's a lot of scenes that basically just go,
More,
okay, plot
more
point, done.
dialogue,
Like there's
more,
no,
yeah,
we are characters
explanation.
living in a
Right.
world, breathing with each other and having a moment. You don't get
Oh no,
a.
see, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think that I think the scenes are strong. To me, it's what the weakness of it is the scenes or the other characters around it, like the stories around the Emperor, for example,
Hmm.
the that stuff, everything to do with the Harkonnens, everything to do with the Emperor, everything to do with the Bene Gesserit. That stuff is where I feel it's lacking, and at
That's
the
what I'm
same time,
saying.
those are
That's what
the
I'm saying. You'd
Right.
have more time, and you could build more up into that or so I like you say, either extend the length even more so you can do that, or cut
that's what
into
I
the
would do.
length of what you did
Yeah,
before. Yeah.
I
And
wouldn't
that's
cut
why I
into
said I
that.
was.
'Cause
That's why I said I wasn't
yeah,
advocating for the truncation, but I'm saying if you wanted to
yeah,
take this specific route, you'd need to, because
because
the
I
amount of
thought
time
I
they
also
don't
thought
Because
have.
it would, yeah. Sorry.
because I also thought that all the characters that I thought were like meh in the first one were strong in this one.
Hmm.
Tawny, Javier Bardem's character, I think it's called Stilgar. I really
Yes.
liked
Yeah.
him in this one, and I forgot he was in the first one.
Yeah.
It's all of those characters I thought earned their stripes with me. Like I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the presentation of their culture.
Hmm.
I loved like the harnessing the worm scene, the little Yoda lady who had like the
Yes.
worm dance. That was awesome. I didn't really understand exactly why any of this was but
Just
at
a
the same,
fun
I
note
didn't
about
care in
her.
the
I hadn't
moment.
realized that she
Yeah.
was as small as she was, by the way, until the second
Oh yeah.
appearance. I was like, what? Because I never twigged that
Yeah.
she was that short. The first appearance, I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
very confused.
Yeah. I mean, all of that stuff I thought was like awesome. It's like
Hmm.
the little bits and pieces of stuff. It's just that it wasn't all strung together in a cohesive narrative by the end. Like at some point, it's like, okay, here's Josh Brolin back, here's Gurney
Yeah.
back, he
What does he
survived.
do? What is
Right.
the relevance of that?
He
Besides, oh,
he
cool, he's
points
back.
to nukes.
Yeah,
That's it.
it's
Like,
literally
like,
this
and
is
I'm
what I'm
like,
saying. Like all of the
okay,
individual beats and setups, I enjoyed. All of
right.
the
But
scenes
that,
we got, I enjoyed. But the fact that they didn't give us any payoff and didn't have enough depth in them by themselves, it really makes the overall piece suffer. It feels like a plot film, but if you go by
yeah,
just the
but to me,
plot beats, it's essentially just
I'm just saying,
Muad'Dib in the desert and
Right.
fight for the emperorship.
I'm
You know,
just saying
Having
that the
having that
book
like
probably
history,
has the
not
reputation it does because it spends that amount of time with that culture. That probably
mm,
is the selling point of the
yeah,
story. I'm
right.
saying that those aren't the places to take the liberties. I think he did. I think he probably went out of his way to be as faithful as he could to that
mm,
material. Um, it's the other stuff around it that didn't warrant the time. To me, you could almost cut all of that stuff out and just made it a desert movie, like
yes,
in effect.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Because I don't understand what the emperor has to do with anything. Like as cool as I love all of the ideas and the sort of presentation of like the heraldry and sending
and the
somebody to
power
make
dynamic and
a
everything.
message, and
right.
yeah, the look of their ships and just the way that they record everything like on like a physical like
Mm,
little cylinder, and because you can't have computers, all that's great, but um I don't really understand it, you know, and I don't understand what it has to do with it. I don't really even understand what the emperor is mad about. I guess is it because that he can't, like the economy is falling apart because we're not getting enough spice off the planet. I don't even know really.
Right.
Uh, and he's mad because the Harkonnens aren't like whipping the Furman into shape. Is he just like an upscale Harkonnen basically, or does he have like his own?
it's
Right.
problematic that the he set the Atreides up for failure with the whole plan of wiping them out, basically. Despite the fact the Atreides would have done the job, he needs them to do much better, and that makes sense in the context of the book because they're setting up the political dynamic as to being that's a faction he needs diminished. He's putting these two powerful
Right.
factions against him to diminish them both and maintain his own power base. That's loosely struck upon in the first film, but it doesn't get filled in and given the personal lens of the emperor himself in the second one. So and again, it tees up weird things in this. Like it makes very clear that he viewed Atreides like a son. He loved him, but we see none of that in any of
Mhm.
the emperor's
Yeah,
actual
no,
portrayal in this. It's
yeah, it
like
didn't.
You know,
the
it's not
exact
shown.
opposite. In fact, he doesn't care at all.
Yeah.
And all of those like
Yeah,
interpersonal connections and the dramatic and narrative weight behind the characters off Arrakis just don't come together at any point. And that needs to be highlighted and framed because one of the main points plot wise, even though it almost feels like an artifact in the presentation of the Fremen stuff, is that Paul is eventually going to drink the future juice and see a future he needs to strive for. He drinks that, and we don't have the slightest inkling of what he's up to, aside from the fact that he's now pro Holy War in a way he wasn't before.
well, I think that
Without the book context,
Like
also,
that isn't very helpful.
right, because
I
you can't
think
see into
that
his
there's
head
a
to see his change in perspective. You know, he mentions about, things that we're told that he sees things differently, and we could see some of it in his actions, but how he got from here to, from there to here, it's kind of just left up to the imagination. It kind of goes back to probably something that they would explain in the book. In the book, I imagine they would probably have a sequence where you can actually hear what he's thinking as he's having those visions. But the fact that they didn't tee it up,
Hmm.
again, makes it feel very sort of abrupt,
Yeah,
you know?
and we've got more of
so
that in the third film, of
the
course, but
director.
based on the
Yeah,
second
well,
book.
it's
But it's just
yeah,
it didn't, given the fact that the whole thing about his connection with his partner on Arrakis, I'm forgetting her name now, tragically,
Chani.
Johnny,
funny.
that was teeing up. The whole crux of that was which way will he lean? Will he go with the Fremen, or will he go with his house and and the future of the galaxy, etc. And the tipping point of what the crux of what makes him make the choice he makes isn't shown, isn't presented. Like it's implied the idea that okay, he's seen something that justifies the Holy War, bloodshed. But do we actually see that manifest anyway? Do we see him struggle with that decision? Do we see him have that moment of realization? And no, it's just kind of all it just left as a
Yeah,
stone
Well,
slate that we're
so
supposed
for
to
me,
take
I think
on
it
as a
really,
given.
on that topic, for me, I'm okay with it, provided that they already have like that we know we're getting a third film
Hmm.
because the movie ends on Chani and she's pissed off,
Yeah.
and justifiably so. The, and the director has said, I'm taking his word for it because he, I think, is a great lover of the book. Clearly, I think it's not something. This isn't whatever this is. This isn't like we farmed this out to whatever director and he took the role and he made a movie. This is a labor of love. He is like
Absolutely.
a Dune nerd. You know what I mean? So I'm taking his statement here. It's not. I don't have the most personal relationship with the book. Like I said, I've only ever attempted it, and I don't know the history of it. But he has said that Frank Herbert was disappointed in the way that the first book, the first Dune, was received by people because people were embracing the Paul character, and he said that he really meant it as a cautionary thing about messianic prophecy. And
Mm.
so Dune Messiah was written to reflect that. That's what I've heard the director, Denis Villeneuve, say about the whole thing. So that makes sense to me as like an engineered fault in this one, if provided you know you're going to be able to finish it. If you don't know you're going to be able to finish it, I would agree that it's a flaw. If you are saying that you know you're going to be able to tell that story and then explore that question and the pitfalls of a messianic sort of character, or that um, kind of make whatever commentary that was being made in Dune Messiah, if you're going to be able to bring that to the screen, then I would understand the decision to leave aside Paul's perspective on it until you're ready to delve into it, because you're left with just the raw sort of reaction of the breakdown of their relationship, and also Connie. But I also don't know how much of that was an invention, a strength that was invented by the film itself,
Mm.
because my understanding is that Chani is bigged up in the films anyway. I think she's kind of just is one of Paul's like lovers in the first book, and she kind of like is there, but she fades into the background. I don't think she's as strong a character in the source material, which is also not surprising given the time it was written.
Mm.
So I don't know how much of it do we care about only because they bigged her up in the first place? You know what I mean? It's like I think that there already was a fair amount of that sensibility of trying to do something with the character that just wasn't there. I just don't think it was overly successful in the end because it was trying to overcompensate for a bit too much. I mean, it really, to me, I would say it went pretty fully off the rails, but like in the
Mm.
final act, only in the sense that you don't, I don't have any. I wasn't rooting for anybody by the end except for Chani, and that is kind of
I like that it finished the film, like you said, with her. That was a strength for me
yeah,
because it was,
yeah.
even if you didn't like any of the delivery of the actual
Like
setup,
even
the
Florence
the
Pugh's character,
final,
I didn't have anything
They set
against
them
her,
up
yeah,
in
but
their
phenomenal
in
actress,
you know,
one of the
but
best of our generation. But had basically
she's not.
nothing to do. She was just
Yeah,
there to be
I didn't
politically shrewd, and
understand,
that was it.
right, especially
or
with
kind of
everything we've seen
politically
with them up
used as a
until this point,
wife,
how
Well,
they've
yeah.
more or
woven
less.
into the
Yeah.
plot. Yeah.
Sorry, Evan. What was that?
Oh
You're
no, I was
cutting
gonna
out
say,
there.
especially since how she was used in like the first two-thirds of the movie as very much his mentor in the desert, and all the time spent with them learning from each other, and that setup for it to end so abruptly. I
Mm.
was just piggybacking off with what Matt said. It almost, now that I'm like really thinking about it, it almost does feel intentional in some way. In some ways, so
I,
maybe, but
I can
I'm
buy
not
that,
saying
and
that,
a
I'm
lot of
not saying that
damage.
excuses it, but I'm just saying that I can see the building blocks kind of falling into place with
I
that
can
one.
buy that, and as Matt says, I think if it's delivered properly in the third film, that will be made up for, absolutely. But I do
Mhm.
And
think,
if it's not,
even
I
having
totally
said
agree
that,
with you.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. But
I,
even having said
I,
that, I do think there was a single kernel missing in the initial reaction of the choice, because we don't actually see Paul switch. We don't have to understand why. We don't have to understand. We don't have to be on his side. It can be a flaw, but I would have liked to
Mhm.
have that moment where he's, oh, okay, maybe what I've been showing up in the film up to this point is going to be shifting for some reason. Just something
Yeah.
about that, because with the possible exception of everything about his sister, which is Dune weirdness, that comes later.
oh yeah,
Um,
I
we
have
don't
no
get
idea
any
what
of
to
that. We
say
just
there.
get he's completely opposed to everything about everything he's doing at the end. Drinks a future juice, and then suddenly he's on board. And we need to have more of a personal character struggle to at least show, not if not what's happening, at least, or why it's happening, or at least potentially what's happening.
Mhm.
At the moment, he goes from being I'm this character to I'm a lot more boring and stoic and
I
future
I feel that
based after the
I,
drink.
I
I felt
Yeah,
that
I
way.
also think it definitely would have helped if they had kind of teed up the idea of him proposing that the emperor's daughter marries him beforehand, because in the
I
film it just like, at least for me, like the presentation, like yes, he obviously talks that Chani, it's like, hey, I love you, but I have to do this, yada yada, but it's so immediately afterward. What I would
I
have liked is, it would have been interesting if, like, after he had had that experience, maybe him and Jessica or whatever talked about maybe that being a possible fallback option. Like, hey, if the invasion goes this way, this could be an opportunity, yada yada, and maybe have that be the struggle. But I think that probably, and then even then you'd have more build up, and then you could have Chani's reaction at that betrayal kind of carry a little bit more weight, in my opinion.
I don't even need the
it's also
details. I
coming.
just need to know that he's planning something. I need to know that there is
Right.
a plan in his mind that he is at least partially sharing with people, because it does not feel, obviously it's implied that that is happening, but we don't feel that or see any of it. And it's not like we get a massive action sequence that plays it all out, in live
Well,
present motion to explain it after the fact either. It just sort of jump skips to the end of it.
I would say that if you're gonna do it, I would want it from not just him, but from like everybody. Like
Mm,
I would like to.
absolutely.
The only ones that I can really understand are the Furman.
Mm.
Because what they're talking about is sort of these preordained like sort of events that he is
Wallaby.
fulfilling one by one. Yeah. Yeah, it's like
Still
and,
God's
and they're
enthusiasm is
explaining,
just hilarious, by the way. Throughout the
Yeah.
entire
yeah,
film, it's like, oh, look how
and
humble he is. He doesn't accept. It's
yeah,
like, God damn.
yeah, and each
Fantastic.
time
40K fans
and
can
each
empathize.
time each time there's a new fulfillment, like they're explaining it's either built up to in advance or they're explaining it in such a way that you get it in the moment. And so that's
Yeah.
all strong. I
Hmm.
don't understand as you say, but I'm okay with it provided we get fulfillment. I don't quite understand Paul by the end. I really also even though there's more around all this and there's more implied and it's good enough, I think it could be better. I'd like to know what the Bene Gesserit want the
Mm.
Kwisatz Haderach to be,
Hmm.
because by the end of it, like he's like using the voice on the revered mother, and she's all abomination. But it's like
Yeah,
okay,
that
but
that was that was hilarious to me. It's like the only thing that makes sense, and it really diminishes them as genius politicos if it's the case, is that oh, you were supposed to be controllable. If you're not controllable, you're everything we want, but you're an abomination. And that to
I don't
me,
know what they want. Like that's the problem for me. Like I have no idea what she's wanting
I
in that
think the
moment. Because
implication is they just want an all-powerful political agent that they can put on the throne and, and manipulate. I don't know. But it's just the fact that oh you're too powerful. I don't know. It's weird. Either way, considering the Bene Gesserit is some of the most interesting part of the setting in film and in the in the actual franchise, it does kind of fumble that a bit.
Right. And then they kind of like go with the whole, oh, you never actually take sides. It's like you've been taking sides up until this point pretty directly. So I don't
I
know what
think the implication is that from their perspective, they are the side, and any idea of sides is just an illusion they put in place because that is kind of how they run things behind the. See, it doesn't matter who wins; they're the ones pushing and advising it, so they win anyway. But yeah, it did come across a bit weakly, given the fact that she's supposed to be a more powerful presence politically than she seems to be by the end. Like Matt said, she's kind of being used, but everything up to the point where she's starting to be actively used, she seems to be even narrating the situation and in control of it. And that halfway
well,
point between the Emperor's power and the Bene Gesserit's power, that kind of rising
I
ascendant
think
influence
she
that could be in the future.
that's got to be something that either comes directly from the book or is like a weird decision to homage from the David Lynch version, because the
Mm.
princess, I think, is the one who opens that film with the narration. But again, that version doesn't really help understand this all this. But yeah, it's I just felt like by the end of it, I didn't really understand that again, really, aside from Chani, and this was only because of the emotional core of I understood what she wanted and what she didn't get by the end of it, that being, her relationship with Paul. Everything else,
And
I
the
I
theft of her
understood
culture,
it on
kind
a
of.
surface level. Yeah, everything else I understood only on a surface level. Like, okay, Harkonnen's manipulated something by getting the message out the Emperor has overstepped. Okay, we're shooting the nukes. Okay, Paul's challenging for the throne. Okay, we're marrying Erelon or whatever her name is, the princess to seal the. Okay, I get all that, but do I care? No, not really. You know what I mean? It's like I by the end of it, I just didn't care, and I had been immersed in the story up
Mm.
till like 80% of the way there, and then it was like a cool knife fight, and I was like, yeah, that was badass, but
It's the same with me.
Yeah.
It's rare that you
Wait.
get pulled along for the story for that length of time. Because I
yeah,
care all the way through. I like you. I enjoyed all the Fremen stuff. It was only after the fact when I realized that it ate all of the other time for interesting stuff later on that they should have either extended at the end or just done differently. That I was like, okay, well, so we basically had two films of fun in the desert, which I enjoyed and which is cool. But if that's not the point of the story, which it wasn't in the framing of this adaptation, then it felt unnecessarily bloated. And at the very
I
least,
really think
it's hard to say. It's
like
like I said, I enjoy all the.
I don't know.
It's not the fact that they should have changed
I
anything in the
really
desert. They just needed to change
Right.
everything around it.
I really
I don't
think
know if
I
bloated,
really
but go
yeah,
ahead.
it's more just because I'm sure that there are a lot of people are like thrilled with these because of how well those
Mm,
parts were directed. I mean, adapted.
yeah.
It's to me. I'm sure that if there's a strength to the story, to the political story that's being told, I'm sure that it's not in that first book because I just this seems so
Why would
faithful
they
in
not
so many
play with it?
ways to
Yeah,
me.
why would they
Yeah,
not play with it if that was the case? But that's what
and
I'm saying. They needed to
it's so
adapt
intricate.
it. They needed to change it from the book and make it better on film then, because you need the the setting of that and the framing of it to help explain and justify what's happening with everything on Arrakis itself.
But I'm also not. I'm not convinced that it is there, like in the book. I think there's a chance that it's in other books, but I'm not convinced because the director also said when about the riding the worm scene, which was like an enormous set piece, show-stopping moment, a wonderful sequence. He said in the book, yeah, it says Paul rides the worm, and it's pretty evasive with the details about what does that look like. So he had to like sketch all that out and figure it all out and instruct his crew on exactly what's in his mind based on that. Like how does a human ride a thing of this scale of it?
Mm.
So in a book, if that's the way the book governs a moment that central to the whole thing, maybe there isn't like all those details already out for you, spelled out for like
Yeah,
what's going on politically.
exactly.
No, but
Nature of film kind
I'm
of
not,
necessitates.
I'm I'm
Yeah.
what I'm saying, yeah, what I'm saying though is not that they didn't. I think they tried. I think that they did
Mm.
probably try already, like because it's 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 so intricate to me. I can't believe that they didn't, think about those things or heighten whatever they could possibly.
Mm.
I think it's probably an opposite perspective from what you often get when Hollywood gets their hands on a story where they just want to cut all this stuff out.
Mm.
Oh, you have four hobbits, kill one, make this three movies. No, make it one movie. Make it for $50 million less than that. Like I think it was done with all the right sensibilities. It's just I also think that they succeeded so far in the presentation that we're just wanting it to have succeeded that well in the plot. It's not that it's a bad story by
Mm.
the end. You know what I mean? It just doesn't live up to
That's what I was
like
saying
the A
before about
plus
the
of
sheer
everything
heights of the
else.
style. It really did
Yeah.
accomplish everything visually anyone could
I
ask
know, but
for and more.
we're
But
being
you
quite
still, but you do
negative,
still
and
get
I just
enough to
want to be
like.
clear to anybody that's like because they don't know if like
Mm.
people who don't know us. It's not like this isn't like when we're talking about Avatar or Star Wars or Harry Potter where everybody already knows our opinion. I think we're kind of coming off as just meh on this, and I think it's much better than meh in the end of it. Like I would rather watch this than many other films
Mm.
that I've seen like over the last few years. It's just the reason why I'm not giving it quite the glowing recommendation is I do agree with all the plot falling down at the end, but it's also um everything that we're all saying. I think we're on a similar page. I just don't want to come across as being too dismissive because I really liked the vast majority of it, and
Mm.
I think it tries much harder than most movies I've
Absolutely,
seen
it's
in the
definitely
last
a labor
It
of
decade.
still
love.
does
That's for
like
Like the
sure.
so
last
much
decade. Yeah,
extremely
yeah.
well, and you still get enough. For all of our quibs about the plot, you do still get enough to where you can at least follow the general idea of what's going on and what to
Hmm.
expect. It's just that those little details, both in terms of presentation and history, that we're kind of hung up on. Which, if anything, the fact that those elements are the things that we are focusing on, mostly from a structural perspective, really just kind of reinforces the idea that we actually are all vibing with the story overall.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
because
put it
I
this way.
mean, I
It's
would
not because
rather.
you're disinterested. You want it. I love that. I want
Mhm.
more of it. That is a strength.
Right,
The
Yeah,
fact that it
but
that's the
makes you want that
difference.
more.
I enjoyed this more than the vast majority of most Marvel movies, for
Hmm.
example. You know what I mean? Like it's I think it's a very well made movie. I like it more than other CGI just genre technology pushing things like Avatar. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like James Cameron's Avatar. You know what I mean? Like the second one of those utterly pointless. Utterly pointless.
As
Like
one most
I
likely
couldn't even
the
believe
following
how
four.
I haven't even
I
seen
couldn't believe it.
that yet.
Like
We'll see.
it's completely pointless.
Oh,
It's the same movie. It's precisely the same movie. I've never seen a sequel just be like the same. With that kind of budget, and that amount of years passed between the first and the second one. I would rather watch this before that, any day. I liked this more than
Absolutely.
like any of the Harry Potter adaptations, because those get the story so wrong. I I
mhm.
have quibbles about it, and I know it could easily be better. I also think it's a much better movie than most of the last things I've seen for the last 15 years in terms of major releases. So
Right.
that's kind of what I'm just coming to the
Hmm.
defense of it for because the filmmaking is staggering,
For sure.
and I
Yeah.
just have that. It's an interesting setting. I would like to see this director do a
And it is
lot
funny
more.
because that's, as we said at the
Yeah,
start, usually the thing you care about the least. So,
Mhm.
yes, and like yes, because well,
Mhm.
it's also just the quality of this iteration.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It is.
It's It
It
is
is
singular. Like
absolutely a work of art, and one
yeah,
that you will get something out of, even if there are certain things that might, get on certain people's nerves. And even in terms of accessibility, like I was saying, like this is definitely some really hardcore sci-fi, but it is still definitely an experience, that I
Mm.
think we would all recommend at the end of the day.
It's very
hmm
cool. One note as well that we haven't spoken about in the glowing aspects of it: the costuming. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh,
That's a
yes.
huge part of why the Bene Gesserit are so cool immediately. Beyond the acting and the story delivery,
yeah. I
um,
mean, I love that.
everything about that is
Yeah,
fantastic. Because I mentioned that because Dune, in particular, based on what we've seen previously, is very easy to get push into the silly territory. You don't want that sillification present, and that's very much not the case here. Everything has been done on that level fantastically.
Yeah. Each faction looks very distinct, and you can immediately tell them apart even from a distance, which I know sounds like a very obvious thing, but you'd be surprised how often that could sometimes get muddled.
Hmm.
but it's also like just in this between both movies, there are a lot of amazing, set pieces, whether they're done for the sake of action or nailing home a dramatic point. There are a lot of poignant death scenes, for example. But
Hmm.
uh, there's the occasional one that tries a little too hard, like Duncan Idaho, because I just don't
Hmm.
care about that character. But it's in this particular second entry, there's so many just great looking, like you kind of almost have like uh a movie ending climax almost several times. Like the scale
Hmm.
always feels that like what just the that one time where they just took down one of the Harkonnen like drilling things. You know what I
Harvesters,
mean?
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that was like just kind of just a scene, but it was
right.
awesome.
Just a
Like in another
just as a
movie.
just
In
as a
another
nip
film, that
just
would
as
be the climax, like you said. It's
Yeah.
that high tier.
just as a funny nitpick that came to mind as I was watching it, because they did smush them like right after one another. They have that whole big "I'm going to shoot down the defenses and fight the soldiers and then blow it up with the laser gun." In the first instance, the second instance, you literally see the beams come out from the side and just slice it apart as though it was nothing. I was like, it makes you question why they needed to clear the ground before they did that. But that's just getting into nerd nitpicks
I'd
side of
need
things.
to, yeah, I'd need, I don't even probably remember exactly what the two
Yeah.
events with perfect clarity. I'd need the help there.
It
But yeah,
did make me
I
laugh though.
really just, yeah. I mean, I loved it when she shot him with the rocket launcher too. That was great.
Yes, yeah, I love that
Yeah, that
reaction. It's
was,
like, oh, get out of my
yeah,
way. Just this isn't a problem.
yeah, yeah. But
I also like how they kind of kept the continuity of like how you had to time the shields and how you can't fire out when the
yeah, that
shield
was
is
all
up.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
very
all
Even
cool.
cool.
though
The
I
effect as
have
well.
no idea.
It's hard to make an effect like that interesting, but that is a really cool just visual, and the sound effects and everything is
I
fantastic.
don't really understand the sword shields at all. Like that's a setting thing. Like I mean,
Mm,
it's there in the book. It's there in both versions of the movie. That's clearly a hallmark of it, but I don't get it. But whatever. It always comes across as an excuse to have like swords and guns at the
mm,
same time.
Mhm.
Which swords are cool, but and also like Blue Eye Samurai, like they call that out like in a way that makes sense. So that's cool. But uh anyway, yeah, I loved it until I didn't. I really,
yeah.
really like it.
Yeah.
It's like I don't like the I don't get much out of the ending. I don't feel that it's incompetently done.
Mm,
I don't get much out of it. And I don't get nearly as much out of it as I get from all the build up for like the first 80% of the story.
Mhm.
But I don't want to come across being too negative because I would much rather see work of this quality than most of what gets made today and has been
absolutely.
made for like the last 15 years or so, in terms of mainstream releases. So I think this is a move in the right direction in all ways except on how to end things. Pretty much,
Absolutely.
And
I
as
think
far as I'm
second
concerned.
yeah,
seconded from
like
me as well with the addition that I would have liked to see more just breathing scenes where the characters are just sitting and talking and living. Like for example um when they name Paul in the tent. That was one of the only scenes that can call to mind from memory of the characters just being characters and without heavy plot relevance and moving things along as quickly as possible or establishing politics or any of that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I very
exactly.
much enjoyed it, and again, cinematic masterpiece.
Mm, Absolutely, like you said, Count. Like if every like story beat had that same sort of energy as that scene did, it would basically be a perfect movie. And I am very much an enjoyable experience, and I am looking forward to if they continue, which it definitely seems like they probably will, considering how successful this one has been. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what this universe has to offer in the future.
knowing the weirdness that comes at book 3, because the second one will be the second book, third one's will be the second book. I'm very curious to see whether they stop after the next one, because it gets weird in the Dune universe. But yeah, this has been our discussion and analysis of Dune Part 2 and a little bit of Part 1 as well. I hope you have enjoyed, and we'll see you again soon. I am Callan, and I still don't have an outro.
This is Matt. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.
Evanova95, we hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.